All right. This is a funny slide. I feel like we made this presentation originally for our project-based housing monthly case conference, and we just noticed that a lot of conversations and team meetings was coming up. There was a degree of comfort levels talking about use of self in this work, countertransference, what it means to us, and how do we take care of ourselves and provide appropriate care to clients while we are humans going through stuff, providing care to humans going through stuff. So this intro slide of the uncomfortable stuff and what the heck to do about it is supposed to, it's a little silly, a little not super professional, right? But that's because this topic, we really need to get comfortable getting uncomfortable. So that's what this presentation will be about. So any other intro things, Rowena?
I was just going to share if you guys also came to the cultural humility presentation last month. There's a little overlap. So hopefully, this is really a chance, I think, an opportunity for us to get to know each other a little better, and for Melissa and I to also be able to understand how to support you guys and what sort of things that we can advocate for in our management positions to serve you guys' needs a little bit better.
Yeah, and they can never talk too many times about building self-awareness and in ourselves as providers. So a little bit of overlap, but good practice. And then I'll see if I can just jump you, Rowena, we're going to start off with a little clip. So let me share with sound. All right.
Transference is one of the most important and intriguing concepts in psychology. It refers to the unconscious redirection of feelings from a person in one's past to another in the present. Knowing about the word and its meaning is a key to trying to become a slightly more mature and less dangerous person to be around. At the heart of the theory of transference is the idea that our expectations of what other people are like is to an overwhelming extent dictated by what the people in our immediate vicinity were like in our childhoods, especially our parents. These formative figures determine a whole range of our behaviors. Our sense of, for example, how people might respond to our weaknesses, whether those in authority are benign or humiliating, whether setbacks can be met with panic or resilience, whether others can be depended upon, and so on. In other words, we don't enter adulthood like a blank slate, waiting until all the data is in before we judge a situation and draw our conclusions strictly on the evidence in front of us. Instead, we have powerful but hidden tendencies to prejudge according to patterns laid down by our personal histories. Some of this prejudgment might be sensible, but a lot of it can be very troublesome. We may get more panicked than is warranted. We may be so suspicious we don't give others a fair hearing. We may be so sure we're about to be attacked, we strike out preemptively. We may be so nervous, we fail. The key thing about transference is that we can't generally tell it's happening. We assume we're entirely reacting to the present, when in fact, our feelings are drawing energy from a source from long ago. That's why maturity deeply depends on getting to know one's tendencies to transference. To help us in the task, psychology...
All right, we're gonna stop there, and Rowena can put up the PowerPoint again. I always see something different in this video. It's such an, there's a lot going on with these rabbit deer. Maybe they're all deer, unclear. But it's such an interesting video. And if we go to the next slide, on here, we wrote down some things that we wanted to make sure that stuck out for you guys. They're things that stuck out for us, right? That this is super normal, right? Transference and countertransference is not inherently a bad thing. You shouldn't feel guilty for feeling countertransference with clients, and you shouldn't feel badly if you notice clients have transference or your staff have transference or your colleagues, your supervisor, if transference and countertransference is happening, right? because it's just wired into us. We don't enter into this world or into our workspaces or our home spaces as blank slates, right? There's a lot of things that have shaped how we perceive other people, how we perceive actions, and then in response, how we prejudge or anticipate what might happen next, and then how we respond, right? So this isn't inherently a bad thing, and we're going to talk about what to do about it when we build awareness, but some of these prejudgments help us in the world, right? We may perceive threats, right? And those things might be true, and we might take actions to be safer. But sometimes our prejudgments lead us to act in a way that isn't warranted, right? The example of we may get more panicked than is warranted. And that may be because we were in a similar situation before and we should have panicked, right? Or something bad did happen. And we apply that same like natural experience or feeling to future experiences. We may get so suspicious, we don't give others a fair hearing. We may be so sure we're about to be attacked that we strike out preemptively. I see this one all the time in clients, right? People who come in just with a wall, right? And they're like so sure that you're not going to help them, you're not going to be patient enough, that you're not going to like them, that they might as well be angry with you already because you're not going to care, right? So they push you away before you can say no to them. And it's so sad, right? Like I have one particular client that comes to mind all of the time, and she literally had the awareness to tell me, I'm not going to be the victim. I'm going to get you first, right? So if I walk around the street like posturing at people, that's lessening the chances that people are going to see an opportunity to hurt me, right? We may be so nervous, we fail, right? And this is often labeled in a term that I don't particularly like around self-sabotage, right? Have you ever heard a provider say, oh, they're self-sabotaging, right? Or maybe it's because they are so wired and to be prepared for things to go badly that stability and happiness do not feel comfortable because they're waiting for the other shoe to drop. So when I start feeling stable and happy, I panic and I leave, right? So these are things that people have learned over decades, and we're not necessarily going to change them immediately. And same with ourselves, right? These aren't just client applications. So those are the little bits from the video, and we're going to dive a little bit more into both transference and countertransference next.
And I was also going to ask, I mean, because even in hearing Melissa, like so many client examples were running through my mind. I was just wondering, do you guys have any examples that come up for you already in hearing about transference and some of these examples Melissa shared? I know you guys are still fairly new. But I'm just thinking of like one of the clients that I used to work with when I first started at the agency, and every time I would meet with her, she would be berating me, commenting on my appearance, my car, why I didn't wear makeup that day, how I was presenting myself as a lady, and a lot of it was her projection of her own insecurities, right? And what at first I was starting to react a lot, like, oh, why does she care what my car looks like? We're getting from point A to point B. Or it doesn't matter if I'm wearing makeup, right? Like those weren't things that were important to me. However, I realized they were important to her, and that presentation, how she looked, her appearance, those were really important things that helped her build confidence. And because her confidence was so low, she felt better when she was commenting on other people's appearances. And so what I learned from that was, okay, I needed to be more validating of how she looked whenever I would see her, because she needed to feel that, like, oh, someone's noticing. Right? I feel seen. I feel valued for the effort that I put into looking nice today. That's like a very simple example, but I encourage you guys to think of where these very simple interactions or day-to-day interactions with a client really share information about them that we might not hear or learn about in like a biopsychosocial assessment, or in creating a goal plan with someone. So these are some of the examples that Melissa and I came up with of what we've seen, in transference happening in our client experiences. For example, provider spending too much time with one client, right? Provider engages in increased substance use. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at transference, my bad. Client engages in hypersexualized or hypervigilant manner, right? So I'm client wanting us to provide them with more care, or wanting sort of that nurturing maternal support, because perhaps they see you as this maternal figure for them. Fearful of disappointing us, right? Telling us what we want to hear, so that we're not so that we want to work with them, so that we want to spend time with them. All of these examples are often, projections of our clients' wants, desires, and also their trauma history, right? And what they've experienced in their lifetime, that's built their understanding of themselves and how they can access care. And it really, I think, when I think of transference, or makes me think of Freud, right? Like, and Freud would tell us, oh, we have to be this blank slate. And similarly, our clients feel like they have to share perhaps everything about themselves so that we know how to work with them. And that helps me, I think, when I'm getting to know someone, it helps me understand, like, how do I view and interact with the world, and how is that different than how our clients see themselves in the world, how they navigate the system around them. And when they bring their own hopes and assumptions and frustrations onto us, right? Like, that's okay, right? A lot of our role can be to sort of be that container of support for them, because oftentimes they may not have had that in their life, and we're teaching them a new way of being able to communicate, or we're supporting them in relearning some of the more negative habits that they may have acquired over their lifetime because of the way that services are provided.
Yeah, and just another facet of this, of helping people relearn responses and relearn experiences. There can be a lot of positive in being able to engage with somebody because they feel really comfortable with you, because you remind them of X, Y, and Z person from their past. That can happen, right? That it helps you because they, you remind me, I have one client that you remind me of my daughter, Sky, right? You remind me so much of her. And that was helpful for her to feel drawn to working with me. But what can go wrong is if I don't behave like Sky, if I don't treat her as a mother, I don't answer her call at 8 p.m., I don't do things that she would expect a daughter to do, I could repeat some disappointment, or I could, like rewire her to also be really disappointed in me as a friend or daughter, rather than when I behave like a provider, she's not expecting me to behave like a provider, right? So there's like that positive that can turn negative. So being aware of what's happening and setting boundaries and containment around the relationship will be really helpful for somebody in understanding why you may not behave how they expect you to behave because of who you remind them of in the past. So there's that, maybe you remind me of my mom who wasn't very kind to me, or maybe you remind me of someone who was really kind to me.
Yeah, I think what's also really cool about transference is that the same projections that the clients might have onto us, we might have onto them as well, right? I know that, especially in like building my understanding of how to be a clinician, I was navigating a lot of my own desire to be this supportive person, right? But what does support really mean if I'm also wanting to do things that might not, might be going above and beyond, right? Or perhaps might be not appropriate for what the client needs, but I'm perceiving, okay, the client needs shelter, so let's get them into a placement quickly, when being in a shelter might be too triggering for them, right? So understanding what our own reactions or response to a client's expression, or what they're relaying to us, that's also really valuable. And
Yeah.
these are some of the examples, again, that we've come up with from our own experiences. I want to open up the floor too for you guys to share about any experiences that you might have in navigating countertransference. And also want to say that countertransference doesn't necessarily have to be just at work, right? I know a lot of times I might have countertransference towards my own primary doctor, or my own therapist, right? And what does that entail? Like, how do I build that understanding? And when Melissa and I are talking about building that awareness, right? That's the key that we want to talk about here, how to build that awareness. And normalizing that countertransference is very normal. If anything, I would be surprised if we didn't have countertransference in working with our clients, because we're human, right? And the human experience is so multi-layered. We're all coming in with our own individual experiences, our own individual backgrounds, cultural identities, and how that plays a part in the working relationship is important for us to consider. I know oftentimes, like we talked about this blank mirrors, that we're just this slate that people can sort of lay everything onto. But what that brings up within us, our stuff, as we like to call it, that really helps us gain insight into what brings us to this work, what keeps us motivated in this work, what helps us be effective, what helps us be better care providers, and more intentional in understanding what the clients really need and want from our services.
Rowena, we have a point of clarification in the chat to just really reiterate the definition of transference versus countertransference. So,
sure. You want to? Oh, okay. When I think of transfers versus countertransference, transference is what the client is projecting onto us. Countertransference would be what the feelings and sensations and experiences that we're having in
providers having in
as
general,
providers,
right?
in working with the client. Does that help to clarify?
Yeah, the definition is right underneath the thing. We didn't make it super clear, but.
Oh, sorry, I didn't read it.
Now, is transference synonymous with projection?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Not always, right? Yeah. I think there's a lot of overlap there. But because you remind them of somebody doesn't mean they'll project their feelings about that person onto you, right?
I think of it almost as like a response, whether that has like a positive implication or a negative implication. The response that the client has to us because we are in this role is where the transference could be happening, could be occurring. And conversely, with countertransference, it would be that same reaction or response to that us as providers are having to the client.
Right. Yeah, like go ahead, Danny. Sorry, was there an extra clarification?
Oh yeah, on the slide of transference, I think it mentioned something about when the client projects or.
Yeah.
So.
Rowena, the next slide. The definition includes the word projection of the reaction onto the provider.
A client's transfer or project. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's where, it does often seem to manifest as projection, right? But I think in thinking about what perhaps the client has experienced in the past, how they've developed their sense of self, and how they communicate, how they interact with the world around them, and what that does to the working relationship.
And I would say too, you're kind of like anticipating our next slide a little bit about building awareness, because a good example that comes up a lot in countertransference is I want to really save this person because I couldn't save my brother, I couldn't save my uncle, I couldn't save my grandpa, right? So I'm so drawn to be, I don't know why they were all men, my own countertransference, right? But I really want to help this person get substance use treatment, or I really want to make sure they get a really good doctor because I wasn't able to do that for X, Y, and Z person. So I pour all of my time and energy into doing that, but the client doesn't want it. He doesn't want a good primary care provider. They don't want to go into substance use treatment, but I want it so bad for them because it didn't happen for somebody I loved. So the next slide is about, what if I feel that way, that I have all these hopes and dreams for this person because I see them going down the same path as somebody I loved, but I don't project that onto them, right? I hold my feelings about my hopes and dreams for this client, and I invite them into explaining to me what their hopes and dreams are. And then if they align, great, I can help this person and it'll really fill my cup. But if they don't align and they have different hopes and dreams, like I need to react. They remind me of somebody else.
Sorry, Melissa, I had a little bit of off and on. I don't know if everybody else also got that.
Oh, sorry about
unstable
that.
internet.
Yeah, my internet connection here isn't always the most stable. Thanks for letting me know.
Well, I think I also wanted to add to Melissa's example that sometimes it's also the countertransference could also be happening when we're feeling bored when we're working with a client, right? Or kind of like not really interested in working with them, right? So that sort of more like uncomfortable feeling of, oh, why am I feeling, or like this kind of not really engaged. That's also something to lean into. Like I know that whenever I meet with a client after lunch, I'm just kind of like, okay, like I feel a little bit like lazy, right? Because I'm just like, okay, I just had my meal, I could go for a nap, but what that tells me is I shouldn't schedule a therapy appointment with a client after lunch because I'm not going to be as engaged in the conversation, right? Or when I think of, for example, I think of a client that constantly presents as very depressed and isn't motivated to work on trying to do something different. So then I whenever I show up for the session, I'm like, I mean, we're just going to talk about the same thing. Nothing's going to change, right? Like, what else can I do except listen to him? And that brings up feelings too, right? That feels like I'm not doing my job properly, or I keep trying and nothing's working. So, those are important feelings to clue into as well, because it tells me more about myself, right? It tells me more about what my interests are. What am I excited in doing? And that helps me figure out, okay, that obviously isn't okay for me to be showing up bored. So how can I be more engaged in the conversation? Maybe it's that we go on a walk while we're having our session, so that we're both able to, have a little bit more energy after lunch. So yeah, I think those are little things that we might not always pick up on, but leaning into that, is really important as we're building our strengths and skills around case management and therapeutic support.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So I have a client that like I definitely feel this way about. Like I spend a lot of time with her and I'm like constantly worried about her even when I'm not working. and like I just feel very like emotionally involved in her situation. And I'm having a hard time figuring out if it's like, am I so worried about her because she needs so many services and I've then spent so much time with her because she needs so much services that I've like built this relationship with her? Or is it like I have that like for some reason need to save her, and like that's why I'm so involved in her story? And so like I'm having a hard time like figuring out, and I don't know if you guys have any tips for this, like figuring out like why I have the emotional reaction I do, because I don't like, she doesn't remind me of anyone specific. So I'm not sure of like where this transference is coming from, if it is indeed transference. And so it's hard for me to like set boundaries when I don't know, like, does a boundary need to be set here, or does she really just need more services than most of my clients, right?
It could be both, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we attach sometimes our desire to like succeed, or like, you know, our desire to like make somebody feel cared for and loved to that person, you know, where we think that, I mean, I felt that way too, Grace, right? Like, this is, if I'm not there, I don't know if this person is safe or happy or comfortable, or if they can access their own help, right? So I think the next part is like understanding what she does to take care of herself, and does she have a safety plan, and when I'm not there, what is happening, and if she's as invested as you in her own plan, or what are her goals. And then if she isn't or doesn't have the capacity to be as engaged in her own care, that's a different story, right? Then we really do need to get her more help to be able to engage more in her plan if she doesn't have the capacity to choose her good investment.
And I'm wondering, Grace, I think your example is great for our little activity a little later, if you don't mind bringing it up again, because
Of
maybe
course.
then we can try to like sift through to see, you know, perhaps are there other things that are contributing to the countertransference with this client. But thank you for sharing that example.
Yeah.
One of the things that comes up for me often in navigating my own countertransference is also understanding my experience of oppression, right? And understanding like or thinking about my understanding of systems. And oftentimes I think when we look at how we've experienced discrimination or difficulties in navigating certain systems, that helps us also understand perhaps where our clients have experienced those same frustrations, and learning and unlearning really the ways that we work with folks is super helpful in building that awareness, because oftentimes the same reasons our clients get frustrated with us is because they've experienced all these really awful heavy things from other providers, right? You know, even I think of someone that's chronically homeless, they have to be on the streets for over 1 year, and we're maybe working with them month 11, right? So what's been going on those first 11 months that have created this response to me that's, you know, you're not doing shit for me. I've been on the streets forever, and I'm feeling really frustrated. You know, like all those projections that we get from clients, and what comes up for us in response. Those are that overlap is where we want to really consider. You know, how can we be intentional around our self-awareness so that we can provide.
Rowena, can you move to the
supports.
next slide? This is like great for conversation for this next slide. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So like exactly what Rowena said, right? Building awareness around our emotional or physiological state when working with clients or providers. Identify what the person, the behavior creates, what about the person or that behavior creates in us, and unpack those responses. So Rowena's example about systems is a great one, right? Most of us are pretty into social justice, right? We come in this field, we not only want to help individuals, we want to change systems so that individuals are better cared for before they even need our help, right? Individuals and communities. So it's really frequent that maybe we have a client who would come into our office and say, you know, I was discriminated against by a racist provider, a racist, you know, like clinic or whatever it might be. And if we're like yeah, let's fight that system. Let's like file a grievance. Let's do X, Y, and Z. And maybe the client just wants to be heard, right? But they're speaking to us of like, what we hear is the system's broken, we should change it because we want to. But that client in front of us maybe doesn't want that from us right now, right? So this is a frequent one that's really hard for a lot of our really awesome social justice minded providers to sit with, right? This person is coming feeling discriminated against, experienced prejudice yesterday at a doctor's office. And instead of like the awareness in us of like, I want to call that doctor's office and tell them a piece of my mind, but then sitting with that and asking the client, what do they want, right? Hearing their experience. Do they want to just be heard? Do they want to unpack the experience and change providers? Or do they want to fight the system, right? Because that's what makes a really mature provider is not following our own need in that moment and following the client's lead, right? And assessing their need. Another great example here too is, oh my gosh, I just had it. I'm sorry, I forgot, but I'm sure it'll come to me. But I hear Rowena.
That happened to me yesterday.
Ah.
I got a call from a client who is at a Weingart shelter, and he was telling me like, the staff there are telling me that C3 isn't doing their job and that I should have been housed 10 months ago. And we're like, okay, well, you were matched 2 months ago, and it's, you know, during COVID time, like these are the things that are going on. Like, can I help understand, like, what are you worried about right now? Because we're almost there. We've got the match. We're almost to your lease signing. What's coming up for you at the moment? He was like, well, I just started feeling like I was getting all this pressure from the Weingart shelter staff to move. And I'm frustrated that they were telling me all these negative things about my case manager, because I know that I've been doing what I need to do with her. I'm like, yeah, you've been doing everything you possibly can, yet we're up against, you know, something that's totally out of our control, right? So my immediate reaction was like, F that Weingart shelter staff creating more problems for my client. But what his response was, I hope you keep this between us, because I don't want my stay at the Weingart to be impacted by, you know, me sharing this information with you. And that was really important for me to hear, right? Because otherwise I probably would have sent an email to the Weingart program manager being like, excuse me, your staff are, you know, so.
Yeah, but that would only be fulfilling Rowena's need, right?
Exactly.
It wouldn't be fulfilling the client's need, which is the awareness piece that we want to talk about today. And the opposite example that I lost before, when we don't want to help a client, right? Who has that client that we're already annoyed before they walk in the door? Like, I have a client that told me I am not enlightened enough to possibly understand his enlightenment. Oh, did that trigger something in me? Being told by a male client that I'm not enlightened enough. I mean, I'm not an enlightened individual. I'm not going to pretend to be, but also being told that, and like he's constantly challenging my competence and understanding every time we meet. So every time I know I have an appointment with that person, ooh, am I bracing for impact already, right? So I've been working on building awareness of my own state so I can be present for him. Because me getting defensive about my competence or enlightenment isn't helping him, right? So what I want to sit with is hearing him and saying, well, what does it feel like to work with someone that maybe isn't as enlightened as you hoped for, right? What would make it feel like the person you're working with is more enlightened? What can I do to help you? But then that awareness, that preparation, so I'm not going into a meeting ready, bracing for that fight, but rather grateful that he keeps coming back and wants to engage, will change how he feels helped. And then the last part, when we'll get to it in the future, how can I care for myself when my compassion is fatigued, right? Because doing that mental and physical exercise every time you need to build the awareness prep gets exhausting. Does anyone relate to this one? I saw maybe
Yes.
some nods. Yeah.
Yes. Hey, Melissa, you mentioned that he was male. So if he was a female, would it have been any different? And is that your own counter transference?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think there could be. I would have to think about that one more. Like, I think sometimes as like a young presenting provider, anytime I like competence is challenged, I think I do get a little bit prickly, right? Like, just because I may be young doesn't mean I can't help or I can't understand. Help me understand. But I think definitely as a female who's challenged by men in the professional world often, I think that is part of my stuff, my own stuff, right? Yeah.
I know that's my stuff. I'm often like, and I can think back to like my grandfather telling me to do things that I didn't want to do as a child, but expecting that of me. And now, whenever I work with older male clients that are like, okay, get this done, I'm like, excuse me, So I think that's really natural, right? Like, those are things that come up perhaps at any point, because I would feel the same way about a male partner if they were to be like, hello, dinner on the table. I would have a very strong reaction. And so learning what those triggers are really helps me show up into the space with the client prepared, right? Because I'm like, you know what, I know this client is going to have some perhaps sexist thing to say to me. And if it gets to an inappropriate point, I want to talk to him about it. But if it's something that, is something I can manage, let me, get in the zone of being able to manage it so that when I show up, I'm here to really listen to what he has to say, right? He's wanting uh, he wants dinner on the table. The client wants, access to food resources immediately. Okay, what's the reason why he can't do it himself? Is there a functional, issue that I've overlooked, and let's maybe work around that.
Yeah, and to call this what it is, it's depersonalizing it, right? Recognizing that it's not about us, right? What that client, most often, it's not about us, it's about that client working to get their needs met in the way that they've learned how to, right? So if they've learned how that they only get heard when they behave X, Y, and Z way, or if they come in yelling, then people like immediately help them, that other providers haven't set boundaries, or other family members haven't set boundaries around that behavior, that they're going to repeat that, right? And it's not because they want to yell at you, you Rowena, but that's how they've learned to get their needs met. And so if we can depersonalize this, think about the person in front of us, and then manage our own stuff, we're going to be more appropriate, mature provide and safer providers, like they said in the video, right? Because we can be more dangerous when we're responding to our own needs rather than somebody else's.
Now, how do we even get into that mindset, right? I think that's always where it's challenging to constantly question, what do we know about the world? Because it's evolving all the time. And these are 3 questions that we thought might be really helpful to build that critical consciousness, to build that understanding around how we see ourselves in this world, and how we can perhaps modify the way that we consider how our clients operate within the world. So what are daily realities we take for granted? How do systems operate in my world, whether that's in accessing healthcare, education, employment, housing? And is that different from what our clients may experience or have knowledge about? I think often when we're working with our clients that are underprivileged, that are vulnerable, the number of problems that they have are so layered, right? So multifaceted. And traditionally, I think when I think of the medical model, It doesn't really fit. It's like fitting a square peg in a round hole, right? The traditional forms of health or mental health care, they might only focus on the person in the doctor's office. They're not really considering the person in their environment and all the different factors that could be impacting why they're not able to take their medication, why they don't want to show up to their doctor's appointment, why they can't go to the doctor, they can't make it to the appointment on time, right? And that's where our role comes in. Like, our role is to sort of see what are these different systemic interactions that are happening in the background that may have been overlooked, and what are the social issues, right, that are excluded when we think of an appropriate intervention.
I want to add a layer here too of workplace stuff, right? So we're going to talk about privileges next too, but a reality that we can imagine taking for granted is like having previous supervisors or workplaces that have invested in us and our safety. Not all of your coworkers, or like me as a supervisor, not everyone I supervise may have had that experience. So if people are skeptical of me as a supervisor, it doesn't mean that maybe I'm a bad supervisor. It might mean that they're prepared for me to disappoint them, or to judge them, or to question them, or to not invest in them in their career, right? So my role then would be recognizing and depersonalizing and trying to understand how that staff feels supported, how that staff feels invested in, right? And so when you think about your coworkers too, or your supervisor, right? What are they bringing into the room? What are the realities? Like maybe they've been challenged by other staff, and so they're bracing for that too and are working on building that awareness, right? So realities we take for granted could also be supportive and safe workplaces or supervisors. So next we'll have it, Rowena, do you want to work through this one a little bit more? Or do we want to use the next slide as the table for talking through it?
Yeah, I think let's move to the next slide. And if you guys have questions that come up from this, please feel free to jump in. So in talking about that self-awareness, I also want to, one, in considering how we operate with our clients, but also in considering how we operate with our teammates, our supervisors, our coworkers, that building that self-awareness is not easy, right? It's sort of this lifelong process that we're kind of committing to engage around, and that can be really hard when the 8 to 9 hours that we spend at work is exhausting and mentally, emotionally draining already, right? But I think why we really want to emphasize the importance of building that self-awareness is because that's going to improve the nature of the alliance that you're building with the client, and in building an understanding of what their experiences are to provide the most effective supports for them. And again, this is probably stuff that you guys have seen in cultural humility before, so if you've already been, I apologize for bringing it back. But I want you guys to consider, what are some cultural factors that, show up in your day-to-day work, right? When you're working with our folks. I know for me, one of the things that comes up often in street outreach is just the mere fact that I have housing, and a lot of the clients that we work with don't have housing, right? So I get to go home at the end of the day, whereas I'm leaving my clients on the streets without, the safety net of housing stability. And when I think of the privilege dynamics that are at play there, I can understand why someone would be frustrated that I can't help them build their tent at 4:30 p.m. that day, right? I can understand that it's going to impact the way that they want to work with me the next day. And so what are some ways that I can build my own awareness around myself, so that when I show up for the client, I'm using these factors to also cultivate strengths within the client? Does that sort of resonate with you guys? I think, it's for me, it's this, it has always been a struggle of what I think is appropriate for a client versus what the client really needs from me. And that's where, like, how do we push our own desires and wants for the client, or how often do we push our own like desires for the clients onto them versus facilitating a space for them to choose, right? And that brings back to like trauma informed care. How do we continue to emphasize client autonomy, client self-determination, client choice, so that they're able to access and build that self-sufficiency to access the goals that they want to achieve, instead of us providing them, with the answers.
So this one's a little harder on Zoom. Normally you have a little worksheet for this one, but when we think about the questions on the last slide about how do systems operate in my world, how is that different from systems, how a client maybe feels within those same systems, right? And then looking at this table, are there pieces of our identity that make those systems feel different to me versus feeling different to a client, right? Rowena's example of the doctor and like assuming that we send somebody home with a list of medications and care needs, and the doctor's assuming that person can read it, they can afford their medications. There's a grocery store in their neighborhood where they can access those things, right? So maybe for some of us, the doctor can hand us that list of medications and care needs and we can carry them out because maybe we had access to different education. Maybe we had access to different parenting that maybe described health literacy to us or grocery shopping, and our clients maybe didn't, right? So that's an example of access to education or socioeconomic status in our communities. Maybe our grocery stores look different. So that very same doctor's office sending home the very same piece of paper around doing X, Y, and Z to support this diagnosis of diabetes would look different to people based upon power and privilege, right? And cultural factors.
I'm having a hard time sending you guys over chat the document for some reason. The network
If it's
is-
open on your computer, potentially.
but I can share it on the screen now. We can review it quickly. Just had it. Okay, here it goes. So this is again, we can send this out in an email after as well, but just some questions for you guys to consider. I know it's a little small. So which of your cultural factors contribute to your choice to work in this field? What's been your personal experience with navigating culture and privilege power dynamics?
Let's stop there. Right? Like,
Yeah.
does anyone have any examples of like what led you to this field and what your personal experience with culture and privilege, does that come up? Do you notice that those dynamics happening with clients, right? Are there anything we took
Yes.
for granted? Yeah, thanks, Kenya.
Yes. I was meeting with a client yesterday and he was discussing some house rules that he wanted. And one of his house rules is that he didn't want colored people coming over. And as an African American woman, it kind of took me back a little bit, but I realized that's just based on like his experience. He was attacked by a Black person before. And so that was just like a lot to take in.
Yeah, that's a surprising thing to hear from somebody, right?
Not necessarily, because racism still
That's a
exists,
good point.
but
Yeah,
for people to be so blatant with it,
sure.
yeah, as their provider, yeah, it was kind of just like a lot.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Kenya. May I ask, what were some of the like physical things that came up for you in that moment?
Well, physically, I think I was just shocked, you know. Um, I was actually shadowing because, like I said before, this is my second week, so I was more so just shadowing, and my supervisor was leading the conversation. So I didn't really have to speak. I was just listening. Um, but internally, I feel like like a little judgment start because he was a white male, and so a little judgment started to come to me, like, okay, like, but this is what I'm talking about. Like, it's kind of like, okay, this stuff is still going on, and you start linking, like, your own political views and things of that nature. So I think that was just happening internally.
Thank you for sharing that and for being open with us too. I really appreciate that. The reason why I ask is because often that's perhaps where we can first notice what's coming up for us, right? Is that in that physical feeling, and then thinking of how it's coming up for us internally, emotionally, mentally, how it's impacting the way that we are sitting or moving, just even the body language that we might be having with a client. And also being able to take time and space for yourself in that moment, right? Being able to take a little pause if that is impacting you in being able to continue the conversation. That's where we also want to encourage you guys to do that, because as providers of care, it's important for you to provide care to yourself as well. And these interactions with our clients can be really, really heavy, right? They can bring up a lot of personal stuff for us. And thinking about it is one thing, right? Reflecting on it is one thing, but acting on it and being able to take care of yourself in those moments are also really valuable.
Yep. Well, what a great example too, I think, Kenya, of like, my reaction to like, oh, that'd be really surprising for someone to say that out loud, right? And then you're like, no, as an African-American woman, that's not surprising to hear. I see racism everywhere, right? So what an example of maybe my privilege as a white person, not hearing that or not seeing it as much, right? That it's not as present in my daily realities, that I have to like look for it, right? And be more conscientious, right? My worldview has to be more conscientious of seeing those privilege and power dynamics, right? So that's like an example right here of how we have to constantly be thinking about, what am I seeing? What am I not seeing? What is this client seeing? What are they not seeing? And how do we work to be comprehensive providers, and then checking in with ourselves constantly throughout this, being in this field.
Which I think brings us to the next two questions that are also really important to consider. How do your identified cultural factors impact the way you build relationships? Right? When I think of how I might use my own cultural strengths in building that relationship, however, if I hear someone make a direct statement that impedes me from wanting to bring in that cultural factor, then what am I going to use, right? So, understanding, like, is this the right time? Are there different tools that I can use to build rapport with someone, different cultural factors that I can use to build rapport or to be able to learn more about someone to build that relationship? And
the privilege within those identities too, of being able to disclose or not disclose, right? There are some identities we disclose. Maybe we present as female, right? Our race is more obvious, but things like immigration status or education status or being a parent or not, those are things we can choose to share or not share. And the privilege around those identities too, that choice of being able to share it. Yeah.
And then what happens when there is a rupture, right? When there's a misalignment in that relationship building? How do you move forward from that? What are also the cultural factors that come into play when we've made a mistake or when someone's hurt us, right? How do we navigate those situations?
And I think that's the next slide.
So I think, yeah, well, I'll definitely send this out through Carrie. So,
But it's a tool we've used in the past to really think about, you know, what identities and privileges are we navigating with our current caseloads? How can we be more mindful? What are possible ruptures that could happen when there's a provider and a client of different identities and privileges? And how do we then prepare for those ruptures or manage those ruptures?
Which brings us to cultural humility, my favorite conversation topic.
And so the PowerPoint run, you want to put the slide
is it
up
not
again?
up yet? Oh, I'm
No.
sorry.
That's all right.
It's hard for me to see what's going on.
I
Because
can also-
I recently got a second screen. So
Ooh.
I'm very privileged to have a second screen, but I don't know how to use it. Sorry.
I think the next one. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So, practicing cultural humility, right? That could be one way that you repair a rupture with someone. And when I think of ruptures, I'm thinking of times when there are conflicts in the way that our cultural values might misalign. I also think of when, you know, sometimes when we self-disclose something about ourselves that doesn't pan out the way that you thought it would. Right? There have been multiple times, just like Melissa was saying, there are things that are very obvious about ourselves that our clients see, and then there are things that our clients don't see that we might want to share with them. And what the potential ramifications of that are can be very dicey, right? Sometimes we don't know, and we might be taking a gamble, but cultural humility is sort of tells us that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to say the wrong thing. And it's okay to not save face, right? It's okay to do something kind of embarrassing so that you're to be vulnerable in that sense with your client, so that you can understand, is that something that the client would respond well to, right? Or is that something the client would need from the working relationship? Would that help the relationship get stronger? Or could it create harm in the relationship? Could it create a barrier within the relationship for the client to want to share certain things? One of the examples that I like to share is, I grew up in Malaysia, which is a very paternalistic society, and growing up, I was taught to not really have extended eye contact with men or really with older adults, right? That having extended eye contact was sort of like a sign of disrespect. And so when I first started working here at with one of my therapy clients, every time he would say something kind of, we would be having a conversation. If he was staring at me the entire time, I would sort of shift my gaze elsewhere, or still maintain the conversation, but not maintain this prolonged eye contact, because to me, I was like, oh, that would be very disrespectful. And he brought it up on I think it was the third or fourth session. Rowena, when you don't make eye contact with me, kind of feels like you're being shady. What's really going on here? Are you bored? Is something else going on that you don't, you're not wanting to hear me? And in that moment, I was like, holy crap. The whole time I had been thinking I was doing something respectful, and instead it was coming out to be that I was doing something that really showed the client disrespect, right? I wasn't hearing him by not making prolonged eye contact. So I shared with him, okay, this is my cultural practice. This is something that, I grew up learning, and that's why I do that. I'm sorry. And I'm going to try to make an effort to have this eye contact with you if that's what you like, if that's what you want from me. And it was definitely awkward anytime we were staring at each other. But it really helped him then start to feel more comfortable in sharing more personal things with me. And we were able to sort of get over that hump of, okay, does he think that I'm, not actually listening when I am? I'm just, not wanting to be disrespectful. And so that's where self-disclosure about my cultural background was helpful. But what came out of that eventually was that he would constantly refer back to that, and it became sort of this like, oh, but because you're from another country, like every single thing was because I was from another country. Or every time he couldn't make sense of what was going on, it was because I was a foreigner. And so then that also is where self-disclosure could, impact the relationship, because that's not my only cultural identity. And that's not the only thing that I feel could be related to, why I react to certain things. And having that conversation with him helped him get to know me a little bit better, so that in developing this rapport, we're able to have a very candid conversation about what the client needed. And I know, in a lot of trainings we talk about boundaries, right? And so I guess cultural humility kind of gives us a pass to be flexible with our boundaries while still maintaining that the client's experience makes them the master of their experience, right? And that we are just learners in this role. We're here to learn and ask questions, be curious about the person's experiences and feelings and emotions, so that we can understand what it is that they need in order to be able to better support them.
Right,
And
like Rowena's intention to provide this client with respect looked like not looking at him in the eyes, right? So her intention was to respect this client, and his experience was feeling disrespected, right? So that was the rupture, was that there was a misunderstanding or a misalignment in identities and experiences, but that doesn't mean we can't repair that rupture, right? By talking to each other about why, like, I was intending to show you respect, and I'm sorry that wasn't the experience. How can I adjust and learn about how you feel respected, right? And he said, I feel respected by receiving eye contact, right? So he was the expert in how, in his culture, right? Rowena let him be the expert and recognize that she maybe had a finite knowledge of this person's understanding of the world and understanding of respect.
I think one of the biggest things I want to emphasize here is we're often taught to have the right answers for our clients, right? And really what we want to encourage you guys is just have questions, right? Because the questions will bring the answers. And in being open to understanding like where the client's needs are, puts the power back in their hands to be able to really provide that trauma-informed care. And when we own our mistakes and biases, not many of our clients experience that, right? Not many of our clients experience receiving an apology from a provider acknowledging they've made a mistake, that they have implicit bias, that they have stereotypes, preconceived notions that come into the work or come into our consciousness. That's normal, right? But how we navigate that's where we can have such a reparative relationship with the client.
So you're normalizing vulnerability and learning, right? Just because you may be in a position of quote unquote power as a provider doesn't mean that people can't acknowledge vulnerability and the need to learn, right? And I think that's a thing that comes naturally to a lot of us in some ways, of like making sure that the client's an expert in their own care. But by that desire, a lot of us come into this field desiring to create solutions or create help, then we move quickly through like hearing the client's experience and then creating solutions that feel like help to us, right? An example came up yesterday at Santos of our staff wanted to buy a lot of bed sheets and things for this client moving in, but I said, did we ask what felt welcoming and supportive to that client? Maybe she wants to shop for her own apartment. Maybe she wants to shop for bed sheets. Maybe she really just feels welcome by us being present and giving her a tour. Does she need bed sheets from us? Right? So us assuming, you know, like maybe my mom bought me bed sheets when I moved into my first apartment and that felt really like nice to me, but it might not be what feels welcoming and kind to that client, right? Or assuming that experience is the same. And I think going back to Kenya's example of somebody who's sharing, I feel concerned about living with people of different races and cultures. And then Kenya found out, you know, like maybe this client had an experience in their past that led them to this belief. And then learning, how can we learn, you know, learning about that client more, about what makes you feel safe. And if they don't have a choice in like living with people of diverse backgrounds, how can we create safety for everybody in that household, and then take care of ourselves navigating those difficult beliefs that that client is sharing with us, right? That's a complex situation and will require a lot of awareness and curiosity and cultural humility in learning about that person's experience, that new roommate's experience.
Just a good segue, Melissa, to when the clients respond with a lot of anger, right? When, you know, oftentimes that's kind of how we notice that first rupture in the rapport. When the clients are pushing us away, blaming us for things, reacting very angrily to our suggestions, right? How do we really deal with that? And what does the anger mean, right? I know when I think of, or a lot of my people always ask me like, oh, Rowena, you seem so chill, like you never get angry. To me, anger is often a mask, right? Anger is often a mask for feeling sad, feeling embarrassed, feeling like I was duped in some way. and how do I put that out there? Could be because of the experiences that I've had growing up or as an adult showing anger, right? And the responses that I've received in return. So when we, oh, this didn't come up. Sorry, there was a different visual on this slide that I do want to pull up. Melissa, do you mind facilitating the rupture discussion while I pull up the axis?
Sure. Yeah. So I think what we're trying to get to with this rupture is, how do we recognize it, right? How do we see through what the client, or try to unpack what the client is presenting us, right? In the situation with Rowena's example of the client not feeling respected, but without eye contact, maybe he would have presented with not wanting to meet with Rowena again, maybe being angry at Rowena because it might be too embarrassing to share that I don't feel good with the way I'm receiving care. I feel like you're judging me. It's way more vulnerable to say that you hurt my feelings than it is to just be angry and fire you, right? If I am just angry, that's something I felt before and I know how to navigate that. But if I felt sad or embarrassed or vulnerable, that might be way harder for me. So if we're seeing those signs of a rupture, right? Somebody's angry, somebody's pushing us away. How do we sit with that, depersonalize it like we talked about earlier, and explore what led that person to feel that way? What was it we did? Was it our behavior? Was it their discomfort with us as if something about our identity, right? And how do we understand that so we can make appropriate adjustments to the way we're providing care?
And I bring up this this visual because I just want to bring it back to that privilege dynamic conversation, right? Oftentimes when we are looking at ruptures and thinking of the misalignment of values, understanding what are our values, right? Like, where do we see ourselves in this spectrum, and how, like, where do we land, and where does that intersect with our client, and where does it also clash with our client, and perhaps what comes up as a result. So in Kenya's example, right, a lot of sounds like there was, the clients presenting sort of this racist belief, perhaps because of his experiences in his prior housing, but perhaps also because that's been his experience his whole life. And how do we as providers of color navigate that, right? Or even if he was working with a white provider, hearing something like that could bring up some stuff for yourselves as well. And so what is the stuff? How do what is the reaction, and how do we manage that?
I have a question, responding to anger. I'll share an example. So because of COVID, I haven't gotten to meet any of my clients. And, unfortunately, with one particular client, he was in the act or, in motion of getting kicked out. And so when I got his case, I already knew that he was going to be, angry because of that. And so in trying to, go through the initial engagement and, get the proper documents, because, I needed updated things as the new case manager. It ended up being where he like yelled at me like, well, you just wouldn't understand what I'm going through. You're just a white woman who just took away my housing. And I know inside, like for me, because I was abandoned as an infant. I went through foster care. I've been adopted, had all these things happen. And so it definitely triggered something where I'm like, oh my God, I don't even know how to respond, because I know my client, if we were meeting in person, would never say that, because I'm not white. I was born in another country. So like I could have some level of empathy, but I think, in this case, as case managers, it's really not my problem to be offended by it. It's really, I'm focusing more on the client. So I knew I had that moment where I was like, oh, I am free. I'm frozen. I don't know what to say. And all I could think of was just, well, I think I just need these documents. Maybe at another time where you're a little bit calmer, we can discuss more. But I mean, what would you say, or like if anyone else wanted to respond, like what would you say to that?
Thank you for sharing that example, Alexi. I want to open it up to everyone else first, if you guys want to give some suggestions.
I was gonna say, I mean, it's tough not to personalize things, but yeah, just knowing that, you're there to help out, but also like setting your boundaries as well. Letting know like, hey, I'm trying to help you out the best I can here, and I don't know, just kind of like checking in with your emotions. But yeah, we're all human. That's that balance we're searching for. So.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah. There's a few things there, right? That's a really great example, Alexi. I appreciate you sharing, because I imagine that person's embarrassed that they got kicked out, maybe ashamed, fearful about where they might go next, uncertain. So they're angry and they think they would prefer you to be the cause of their homelessness or their uncertainty rather than taking accountability. Because acknowledging I had a role in my own uncertain, scary situation can be embarrassing, right? And then assuming that you're not going to want to help them. And then the other piece of assuming you're a white provider, makes me think that that person's encountered a lot of white people who have put up rigid rules for them and not understand their complicated behavior presentation, right? Like maybe that person has presented with a lot of anger before and got kicked out of spaces because that anger feels scary to white people, maybe, right? Or not, right? That's my assumption, is that sometimes there a lot of programs are founded on white saviorism, right? But only wanting to help people if they present in a certain way, right? If you present appropriate and you're following the rules and you're compliant with the house rules that we've put in place, right? And so that could be the reality that this person has navigated and you're being lumped into it, you know? And then, so it's curious, and then asking that person more about, like, it's okay to feel scared about, or it's okay to be angry about losing your housing. I imagine that you may be feeling uncertain about what is next for you, right? And so it helps that person kind of asking more questions about what's going on for them and how we can best support them. But it's okay to take a break too, right? Let's circle back after you've, you know, it sounds like you're experiencing a lot of feelings right now about this decision. I'm here for you when you want to talk about it further and talk about what's available for next steps. So knowing that it's okay to be angry and we're still going to be there with boundaries, right? Just in case, you know, there isn't something that, if that person was inappropriate, we do have to set boundaries. But
I think one thing I want to add, this applies to both Alexi and Kenya's examples, is that it's also okay for us to model cultural humility to our clients so that our clients understand how they can be better supports to us as well, right? Just like, you know, we're wanting to care for them, oftentimes our clients also want to care for us, but because of their experiences, they might have certain defenses up, right? It's okay for us to say when things are hurtful and when they're not appropriate, especially when it involves discriminatory statements, right? Especially when it impacts the way that we feel about our cultural identity. And so, you know, for these conversations, perhaps it might not be appropriate to say, hey, that was not okay, right when the client is upset, but coming back to it in a moment when you know, it's not escalated, to share, when I heard that, this is how I felt, right? And I don't want to have this feeling in working with you because I care about you, because I want to be able to provide services that you want, that you need. And how can we work together so that both of our senses of self are respected? Right? And I think having that conversation models to the client you care about what they believe, right, and what their experiences have been with a problematic system, but that your experiences and your cultural identity are equally important. And bringing that to the table is where you can be your best self.
And the way, like, I hype myself up for those uncomfortable conversations is like moments of discomfort for me starting this conversation pay off for this client and future providers, right? So my temporary discomfort in like revisiting that will help them be successful in future programs and navigating their awareness and being able with working with new providers, new programs. Because sometimes it's really hard to circle back, right? And start that conversation. You just want it to be over. Like, we want to move through it. Let's pretend it never happened, right? But that can be really curative for somebody for a provider to say, I still remember, this is why it didn't feel okay, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve care, right? Because maybe they've been kicked out of programs and then people are like, you know, like glad for it and don't circle back to it. So it can be really cool to do that if you're feeling ready and if you're feeling supported in doing so.
And you also don't have to have these conversations by yourself. Right? I think that's where asking for help from a teammate or a supervisor, someone that, you know, also is able to be a mediator in that setting and to provide a stronger boundary, right, could be really helpful.
Rowan and I used to tag team a lot of things.
Yeah, and it helped me feel, I mean, Melissa was my supervisor, it helped me feel very safe in being able to navigate those conversations, because a lot of my cultural factors tell me my feelings are not as valid as someone else's feelings, or I don't need to stand up for myself in helping someone that's more vulnerable than me, right? But what that does for me is then makes me feel pretty shitty about myself, right? It takes away from the value that I place on myself, and it also adds to compassion fatigue and burnout, right? And so then it doesn't make me excited to come to work if I have to deal with someone that's making pretty pointed remarks about who they think I am, right? So I want you guys to really, feel empowered to have those conversations as well, because your feelings and emotions and the way that you present yourselves is integral to how you navigate the world.
And I think we have 2 more slides in this stuff in practice, and then we'll skip the vignettes, go to compassion fatigue, and if we have time, we'll do some more practice.
Okay, cool. So the practice is kind of where I was thinking we could pull in your example, Grace, or if anyone else's examples, we can sort of, if you guys want to jump in. But this little fun Venn diagram kind of helps me like visualize, where do I look for the countertransference, right? When I'm working with someone, my stuff is coming up, their stuff is coming up. But we have to navigate the professional relationship as well as what comes from all of that. And so, exploring what your personal thoughts, beliefs, physical, going back to those, that what's coming up physically for you, that helps me think, is this something new, or is this something I've experienced before? If it's something I've experienced before, when has that happened? What were some of the triggers that brought me to that?
You want to put up the example too, before we
yes.
jump into, because I feel like it's nice to see an example before we do one together.
Thank you for reminding me. It's the sharing.
The screen share, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Can you guys see that?
You do a little bigger. But I'm also farsighted, so.
And let me see if I can this time put it in the chat.
We might be able to send an email after with all the attachments. Carrie can probably help us with that.
Sorry, everyone. It says network disconnected.
Okay.
Okay, so this is sort of an example that we filled out, and where we're, a good way, I guess, to think about where the countertransference is. So when you experience strong reactions before, during, or after a client interaction. First, let's think of yourself, right? Be aware and list all your feelings, thoughts, physical sensations you're experiencing.
When meeting with the client.
When meeting, before,
or about the client, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Then listing all the feelings, thoughts, physical sensations that the client might be presenting, right? So you're thinking of where you stand and where the client stands. And then I like the professional relationship piece, just to think of, okay, what is the client's presenting problem that I know? These are the facts, right? What's the client's presenting problem? List the things that you've already done to support them, things that they've done for themselves, right? Things that contextual things that help you understand where the client might be coming from. And then from there, going into, okay, what's going on with me right now? My stuff, right? What's perhaps something that my mind is distracted by when I'm meeting with this client? Is there something else going on outside of work that's impacting me today?
So this person was feeling like insecure about being a therapist, has a family history of substance use. And so in that moment with this client or before, feeling a little bit of fear about disappointment and maybe what's going on with the client, anger about maybe the system, anxiety about being able to help. And this client is bringing that past trauma history to the table. Mom has, their own mom had an alcohol addiction or neglectful parenting style. So that client is feeling anxiety about passing on trauma, excitement about being a parent. And then that in that middle, what are we going to do about this countertransference, and what areas can we grow in?
Does this visual help to sort of compartmentalize in a little way, like how we can conceptualize learning about our countertransference? Because what I like about it is that it helps me to like break down the interaction, right? Helps me figure out, okay, what's going on with me, what's going on with the client, what do we know is going on in general, right? And then perhaps what's happening bubbling under the surface that we really need to pay attention to.
And what can we do about it, right? This person, when they filled out this example, said, I can consult with my supervisor. I can reframe what's going on, their behavior in like maybe this client's efforts in trying to parent while experiencing PTSD has been affected by their anxieties. And I can focus on the client's strength and resilience rather than being disappointed in maybe how much progress or how little progress they may be making.
And I like to, I mean, at the end of the exercise where it says, what do you wish or hope for them? That's kind of where, it's a good place for me to regroup, right? What exactly do I want to be able to offer? And what's stopping me from doing that, right? Knowing certain things that the client might need or want in the way that we're working together. And it's also okay if the transference or if the transference or countertransference reactions that are coming up are too overwhelming. Asking for support and also asking for grace in being able to like navigate a situation is super important, right? It's okay if you don't want to keep working with that client. Is it something that you can overcome? Is it something that there are ways to like add supports to so that you can keep working with them? Or is it something that's going to be harmful to you and might not be an appropriate intervention for the client?
So let's jump into Grace's example, maybe, if you don't mind, Grace.
Yeah, no problem. Where do we start?
I'll open up a blank one.
And then we'll have about 20 minutes for compassion fatigue.
So Grace, would you like to use your example?
Yeah, I'll give like a specific example. So last week I was on the phone with her, and she is calling me, telling me that she's been hospitalized, which has happened several times in the past few months. And she's telling me that she's meant to get a surgery, but she doesn't want to get the surgery because she feels like the doctor isn't listening to her and isn't giving her what she needs to feel safe going into the surgery. I can tell that she definitely is like, she's afraid of the consequences of going and having like heart surgery, and is explaining that to me as the doctor's not listening. He's not giving me what I need. I'm just going to leave. I'm not going to do this. Like, I don't want to, I don't want to deal with this. He's mean, he's old, and I don't like him. I'm not doing the surgery. And so like I had this conversation with her, and it was like after 4:30, so I already knew I really shouldn't have been like sitting on the phone on like a Friday night, like talking to this client, but I started to feel like just stress, like she's not going to get the surgery, like she's already so sick, like I don't want her to get any sicker, and she'll say things like, I know I'm dying, it doesn't matter, like and I just kind of felt like helpless, like what am I supposed to do? I can't like make her get the surgery. I can't go in there and explain to her doctor what I'm supposed to be doing, or what she wants him to be doing. Like I can't like be by her side and be an advocate for her. Like she has to just do it herself. And like from all my previous interactions with her and the way that she's talking about it now, like I just know she's not going to do it. And she didn't. She went back home, and she's going to end up in the hospital again, like she does every few weeks, because she won't take her medication and she won't get these surgeries that she needs. And it's just like distressing to me to watch her health get worse and worse. And I'm like out here doing all this paperwork trying to refer her to people that are like going to be an advocate for her, so that like be in the hospital with her or help her get her medication and those kinds of things. And I just felt like distressed, like helpless, like wishing I could do something for her, but knowing it just wasn't my place anymore. There's nothing more that I could do. And it just kind of felt like I'd failed in like the most essential aspect of making sure that she has like, that she's happy, healthy, housed, and safe, right? Like I just felt like I've done none of those so far. And it just felt like the most essential failure for her to be like in pain all the time, like feeling like she's dying, and that I can't like fix that for her. You know, as much as the work I've done for her, like it comes to a point where she needs to do something and she just hasn't. So I feel like I've failed.
Thank you for sharing all of that.
All right, I'm trying to add
There's a lot.
You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job.
And she says, she brings up a lot like this doctor, this provider is being racist towards me. I know he's not listening to me because my skin is darker. And she'll say, I know the doctors only care about themselves and they just want the money from the surgery. They don't care about me. They don't want to make sure that I'm safe. And just like a lot of distrust of other providers. And I know that like when I first met her, like I definitely got that distrust from her. And like I've spent time with her to the point that I feel like I've built a lot of rapport, and I'm like really proud of that. And like and I think that comes into play too. Is like I'm the only one that she trusts right now. I'm the only person that she has like essentially at all. And so I feel like because no one else because she doesn't trust anyone else, she shouldn't have to work with anyone else. Like I should take care of it for her. And like there's definitely like pros and cons to like having built that rapport with her, because I'm the only one that rapport with her so far.
Yeah. So you feel that sole responsibility to carry out these, because there's not anyone else around that's been consistent for her.
Yeah, and like overprotective, because she'll tell me about other providers or people she's working with, and I'm like, oh, I wish I could just explain to them the situation, you know, or like I wish that I could just be the one to do this.
Right. So we've made ourselves like almost irreplaceable in this situation, right? And like, but you've also taught her a really cool experience of building trust where with somebody she didn't know, right? And somebody, so how could she repeat that experience? And then the other piece of that being we couldn't control whether or not somebody would hurt her. So if we get her to be vulnerable to building a new relationship with somebody and that person doesn't follow through with being trusting or great, then maybe she's going to be like, see, I told you.
Right.
See, I told you I couldn't trust them.
Like I have some level of culpability. Like I feel like I have a level of culpability. She might feel like I have a level of culpability in that, even though that's not. That's not.
There's only so much you can control, right? And talking to her about that, of like, this is within our control. This is with like outside of our control. But what are the pieces we can prepare for together? And what happens if you're right and the doctor is racist and unhelpful? And what is the risk and reward with each, right? And then if the doctor, but the reward is, what if the doctor is really helpful? You know, the payoff of that will be big.
Right.
Yeah.
Missing anything Grace, that you want to add, so that we can think of perhaps some sources of support for you?
No, it looks good so far.
Yeah, I'm impressed, Rowena. That was our first time doing it on Zoom, and
yeah, that was
knocked it out of the park.
Pat on the back. Synthesize information well. Thank you. Okay, so in thinking of all of this, Grace, where do you see some areas where you can explore a little bit more?
And that's the thing I'm like struggling with. I feel like I think about this day and night, like, why is it that I'm so concerned about her? Because I don't think it necessarily feels familiar in any like tangible way. Like, she doesn't remind me of anyone particularly. I don't know. I mentioned when I was explaining it to you that I said the word failure a lot. So maybe it's that. It's like, it feels like this is a challenge to overcome because she has so many needs as a client. And that if I can't overcome this challenge and do it correctly, then I've failed.
And I think what I'm hearing too, which is super common, is like, we know the fix. We know what will make her feel better, right? We know that heart surgery would make her live longer, feel better, be better. And sometimes when like a solution is so obvious to us and that client can't follow through, it can be really frustrating, right? Because for us, we would just do the thing, right? Because it's accessible. Maybe we lived and grew up with a sense of trust in providers or the medical system. And so it would be a way easier decision for us to make. And then this underlying experience of distrust or being taken advantage of, if she's been taken advantage of before, is preventing her from accessing basic health care that would improve her life. And that's hard to watch, right? That a system founded in white supremacy maybe created this distrust for her. And now that white supremacy is perpetuating more bad health outcomes for her. And how could we fix that is hard, right?
Yeah. So it's like my like fear of incompetence and her like historic struggle with like being oppressed and being mistreated in these systems that weren't set up for her. And like she has that experience every time she, enters the healthcare system. That experience of white supremacy. And I'm like, and it also feels like silly that like these feel like my insecurities and my like in like being a competent person who can like succeed, and like her like deep trauma history of like being mistreated and like struggling with a chronic illness. Like it feels it feels a bit silly and like misweighted, right? And like that I'm the one that's like in control, and like I'm the one who's in charge of like getting her care outside of what she can do for herself. And like it feels like I'm getting distracted by silly things when like you're pointing out like the reason she feels this way is like such deep-seated traumatic history she's been through.
Yeah, these are it's decades of learning decades of learning and experiences that are entwined in this, right? And you've been working with her for how long?
Since December, early
So
December.
3 months of engagement,
Right.
and you're putting this weight on yourself to fix this now. Yeah.
Grace, a lot of what you shared I really resonate with. I think as a clinician, it's being in a helping role, there's so much responsibility that we feel, right? And oftentimes we are the face of the system in navigating all of these problematic stuff with our clients. And so it does feel like there's a lot of responsibility to connect the client to a resource that we know is available. When the client doesn't utilize that resource, it might feel like a personal failure. But in thinking of her trauma history, in thinking of the community trauma around the medical system in general, right? How then do we feel about being that face of oppression? How then do we feel about having to say this resource isn't enough for someone with everything you're going through, right?
While also recognizing an intervention is also radical acceptance and continuing to show up, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you haven't like said, well, if you're not going to get this surgery, I'm not going to work with you, right? That's an intervention. Being consistent is an intervention. Offering options and access to information is an intervention, right? Helping her understand her choice and respecting her choice. And then if she changes her mind, not shaming her for that, right? Those are all legitimate interventions, even if they aren't a fix, right? The heart surgery is a very obvious fix, but all of that stuff in between there is real care that you're providing to her.
And I think also like I'm very aware that like I am the face of this system, and like I can be the face of oppression for people because I'm a white woman, and I'm like terrified of being another white person that's coming in and not giving them what they needed, like being another white person that makes life harder for them, being another white person that didn't provide for them what they needed in the past, like just being another like face of the oppression that they've faced, and like not having the resources they need because there's a white guard to it that didn't give them it, didn't give them access to it, didn't help them out. And I feel like I'm very aware of that, and I think that also contributes to like I feel like I need to like save her. I need her to get everything that she needs because I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be another person that did this to them, right?
And while I don't think it would be fair to reframe the situation. I do want you to consider what are things that you've already done to shift the way that she's thinking about the system, right? The fact that she's willing to continue to go to doctor's appointments with you, right? The fact that she's willing to engage in continued conversations about why she doesn't want to have the surgery with a mean old doctor that's white, right? Knowing that you're a white provider, right? That to me shows that there is a lot of strengths to continue working on. And when I think of someone that's with the health issues that she has, she's had this for years, right? I imagine you've been working with her for 3 months, and it's impossible for us to create such radical change in such short amount of time when we're dealing with decades of trauma and hurt, right? So oftentimes our intervention of being the helper, being consistently available to support in the minor things, is still working towards a larger intervention.
And it is a system of white supremacy that has defined success in a specific way, right? And so she gets to define what success and comfort is for her, and you guys get to define what success and comfort is for you as a team of providers. But like our medical system have decided like this is success, right? Complete treatment of this heart condition in this way is success.
Yeah.
And it might not be, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to add, like, it just sounds like the baggage you're carrying is like white guilt, and it's unfortunate. Like, you're trying your best, you're sticking with your client, so don't beat yourself up too much for it. I do understand that, like oppression. I was wondering what kind of like health insurance she has. Maybe like she can get a person of color to like perform that surgery, or like explore, different avenues.
That's a great suggestion,
Yeah.
Annie.
Yeah.
Right? Perhaps it's asking, would you want to restart your care with a new provider? Right? But would that feel better, even if it means starting from square one again?
And I hate to limit this good conversation because this is the good stuff that you should continue to talk about in your teams, right? I appreciate your vulnerability, Grace, and I appreciate, people listening and providing like your perspectives, and like I encourage you all to continue to do this in your teams and normalize talking about identity and the uncomfortable stuff. And then I want to make sure we have some time for compassion fatigue so that you guys notice that too in this work and these conversations. And we'll send these slides out. This slide is kind of cool, the authentic use of self. We put this in here to remind you it's good to use like you can't not use yourself and your personality, but recognizing everything that goes into how people view you as a provider, how you view you as a provider, and how we use ourselves differently in different scenarios is important. So
being your genuine, authentic self is a great rapport building tool, right?
Yes.
The clients love learning about us as individuals, just like we love learning about them. And it is very much that human experience, I think, that is the bonding factor for a lot of the work that we can do.
Yeah. And then we empty our cup, right? We use ourselves all day, we output all day, and then what, right? And so making sure that our compassion fatigue, that we are tapped into that, so then we don't project our emptiness when we get to that point onto other people too, right? Because being really good at our jobs sometimes means that we will then not have enough left for us and for the people we love. And that's not winning, right? That's not being a great provider either. So we want to talk about how we can recognize risk factors in ourselves that may lead us to burnout. What are our protective factors that help us be able to continue to do this work and not experience like the moral injury that may come with continuing to watch oppressive systems oppress, right? And then the red flags in ourselves that remind us, or maybe our colleagues can notice, that say, hey, Melissa, time out, right? Or that your supervisor can notice. Rowena and I do this a lot for each other, even, her as my, as somebody I supervise would be like, I'm noticing that you're not listening as much as you normally listen to me, right? And so we can hold each other accountable to caring for each other so we can show up better. So I think the next slide, it talks about examples. And if anyone relates to these, shout them out.
I was gonna start jumping at fatigue.
Yeah, please.
Frustration, cynicism. Yeah, sorry.
Burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, right?
Yeah, I mean,
signs, symptoms, triggers.
The stuff that we do at work is really freaking hard. It takes a lot of ourselves, right? And then we got to go home and be available to our friends and family and animals too. Like that's a lot. And so I get one of the things that, Melissa and I, in working together, also know how, also have realized it's important to be vulnerable with our teammates, with our supervisor, with the people that we interact with at work. Not just with our clients, but really with the support systems that we have at work. Because in being vulnerable, we can feel seen as well, right? And that's, I think, something that's so important, not just in providing care to our clients, but in receiving care ourselves. It's infinitely more hard for me to want to come to work when I don't have a team that I trust, when I don't get to have fun at work as well, right? Knowing that like all my teammates care as much about the clients as I do is a huge strengthening factor for me. Because then we can talk shit about the clients, but we can also talk about their strengths. We can also talk about what we get really excited by. We get to talk about accomplishments and feel supported in that. And we can talk about the stuff that's really frustrating.
Like not being enlightened enough.
Like not being enlightened enough. Like having to be that face of problematic systems over and over and over again. Like, needing to cry in our closed office door once in a while.
I have a great example too of how like I recognized one time that one of the many times that I needed a break was, we work in homelessness, and my partner works at like Disney. So he's an animator, right? And his problem that he brought to me, I walked in the door, I had like written a hold, unfortunately had to send someone to the hospital involuntarily for a psych reason. And he's like, guess what happened today? They ran out of my favorite flavor of vitamin water in our fully stocked kitchen. And I even told them last week that, and I was like, oh no, absolutely not. I don't care at all. I mean, it wasn't exactly that trivial, but it was something that felt that trivial. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Can you not talk to me right now? And I didn't show up for him in the way that I would have preferred to, because I was like, how could you possibly complain about this? But that's not fair, right? His experience of a stressful day is still a stressful day for him, and I care about his stress. But not being able to hear it sometimes is when we got to be like, okay, he doesn't know everything I'm bringing into the door. And if I don't share it with him or my therapist or process it on my own and be ready to be a partner and, you know, a friend and like care about myself is a concern, right?
So how do you not be an a-hole?
What's my plan to not be an a-hole?
Or how do you also not be like overextend yourself, right? I think because you can sometimes it can come out in all these negative ways in terms of how we express ourselves, but can sometimes also come out in a very like, oh, actually I'm fine, I love helping people, and then I do too much of it, right?
Toxic positivity, right? Everything doesn't have to have a silver lining.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. I think we are also built to kind of have this sort of optimistic need all the time, right? Things are going to get better. We're going to get through this together. And those are great supportive statements, but sometimes that's just not the case, right? Sometimes I feel like that. And that's all right too. And how do we take care of ourselves in that moment? And everyone's going to have a different way. My way changes, I feel like, every other week, the way that I can take care of myself. And as long as you're identifying some supports and knowing how to ask for support, I think that's the most challenging thing. Any of you guys want to share some self-care strategies you do?
I use when I do commute to the office, I use that time in my car to just put on like a mini concert after work, just jam out to like maybe 2, 3, 4 songs and just kind of ground myself before I get ready to walk into the door to face my partner or my family, or exercise too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know, recently discovered endorphins. I'm into it.
That's a great example. Yeah, having that transition time.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I go on hikes on the weekend with my mom, and
Yeah.
that's really healing for me.
That's great.
I know I feel really good when I'm able to, like, before supervision, write down what I need, right? Sometimes I'm too busy doing my job that I don't prepare for supervision. And I feel really good when I've built in time to write down 2 things I need from my supervisor, and then I sing to her. And then she's like, of course. And I'm like, why did that take me so hard to like write down and verbalize and ask for, right? I need time too, and I need support too, and I need to sometimes ask for it, because unfortunately I've had the privilege of being able to receive support. So when I build out that time to ask, it feels good.
I will also say, like, I'm looking at this wheel and I'm like getting stressed because there's all these things on there that seem like so fun and like so fulfilling. And I just know like there's specific things on here that I've been wanting to do. Like there's art projects I want to finish. Like I want to write more. And I get home from work and I'm like exhausted. And then I feel guilty that I'm not working on these other things that I wanted to do. And I recently went to like the Lean On Me support group, and we were talking about that. And they were saying like sometimes self-care is just like figuring out what it is you actually want to do when you get home. Like it doesn't have to be this checklist of, oh, I need to do my self-care, I need to do a face mask, or like read a book. Like sometimes you don't want it, you really don't want to read, you just want to sit and watch YouTube. And if that's what you need, then that's what you need. And I think it's taken me a while to figure that out, but it's been really healing since then. They're like, it's okay to like sit on YouTube and watch like I watch this girl, like she puts on makeup while talking about murder mystery stories, and that's like really great for me. And like not feeling guilty about it anymore also makes the self-care even better. So
right, not feeling like you have to produce. And someone told me, if you're in your season of rest, enjoy it. And I was like, ooh, that's a great way to like say that I'm on the couch and I don't feel guilty about it. I'm in my season of rest. Sorry.
Yeah, sometimes having grace with ourselves, having patience with ourselves is self-care too, right? Just being, just existing can also be self-care.
And being mindful of time, because I know you all have things to do, but we did put there's a new flyer on here too. But there's standing in solidarity groups, right? If you want to talk about what it feels like to be a provider of a certain identity with other people who may have similar experiences, right? There's the Black Employee Support Group. There's a People of Color Alliance. There may soon be an Asian Pacific Islander Standing in Solidarity group. There's an Ally Awareness Standing in Solidarity group. There are a lot of different groups out there to come in, talk, share experiences. There's the Lean on Me. I'm glad somebody went to that.
And if you guys have ideas of groups that you would want to develop and be in community with, please reach out to, I believe it's Strategy and Integration.
I know that the LGBTQ Standing Solidarity Group was looking for a new co-facilitator. If anyone's interested too, there's a lot of space to get engaged in things that aren't just providing care to clients or doing your day-to-day, right? Yeah. I think that was it.
Any questions, final thoughts?
Thanks for joining today.
Everyone. I really appreciate all the participation and examples and sharing.
Thanks, Kenya. I'm glad you could join. Sorry for going over.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Grateful you're all a part of the team of the people concerned. And then I think, Rowena, I don't know how you stop the recording and like send the